I never thought I'd be starting over at 57. The day Harlan told me he was leaving, I was polishing my grandmother's silver, the wedding ring set she'd passed down, catching the afternoon light streaming through our kitchen window. 34 years of marriage, 1 son, and a lifetime of shared dreams. All of it suddenly meant nothing. "I've fallen in love with someone else," he said, his voice steady as if he were discussing dinner plans. "Delphina makes me feel alive again." But here's what he didn't know about the woman he was leaving behind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silver polish had dried on my hands by the time I finally moved from that kitchen chair. Harlan had left for what he called important meetings, though I suspected he was really rushing to tell Delphina about our conversation. 34 years, and he delivered the news like a weather forecast. Clinical, efficient, very much in character for a man who had spent the last decade crafting his image as Charleston's most dependable state senator. I set down my grandmother's ring set, the same rings I'd worn since 1989, and walked through our house on Lagar Street. Every room told the story of a life carefully curated. The living room with its restored federal-style furniture, the dining room where we'd hosted countless political dinners, the sun porch where I'd spent hours sketching design concepts back when I still had a career of my own. This house had been my canvas once. Before Harlan's political ambitions consumed our lives, I'd been Imogen Vale Interiors, a name that meant something in Charleston's design circles. I'd worked with old families and new money alike, helping them weave their stories into their spaces. But somewhere between campaign seasons and fundraising galas, I'd let that part of myself fade into the background. Supporting my husband's career, I'd called it. Now I wondered if I'd simply been disappearing. The phone rang, and I knew it would be Orla before I even looked at the caller ID. Orla Quinlan had been my closest friend since college, and she possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense when my life was falling apart. "I'm coming over," she announced without preamble. "And I'm bringing wine." "How did you—" Harlan just walked into Magnolia's looking like a man who'd won the lottery and simultaneously gotten away with murder. When a 62-year-old senator starts grinning like that in public, it's never good news for his wife. 20 minutes later, Orla swept through my front door like a force of nature. She'd traded her usual business attire for jeans and a flowing tunic. Her silver hair caught up in what she called her crisis management bun. At 55, she ran the most successful boutique travel agency in the Low Country. But her true calling was managing the emotional disasters of her inner circle. "Tell me everything," she said, uncorking a bottle of Sancerre without asking where I kept the glasses. Orla had been drinking wine in my kitchen long enough to know her way around. I told her about Delphina Reeve, 29 years old, self-proclaimed, lifestyle coach and spiritual guide, the woman who was apparently helping my husband discover his authentic self. I told her about the way Harlan's eyes had lit up when he spoke her name, the same way they used to light up when he talked about his first campaign for city council. "The bastard," Orla muttered, though not without a certain professional appreciation. I have to admit, it's boldly cliché, like he's following a midlife crisis playbook. "The worst part," I said, accepting the glass she offered, "is that the name sounds familiar. Delphina Reeve. I keep thinking I should know her." Orla raised an eyebrow. "Maybe she's been to one of your political events?" Maybe. But something nagged at me. The name carried weight, like a song I couldn't quite place. We sat in my kitchen drinking wine as the afternoon light shifted through the windows. Orla had opinions about everything. What I should do with the house, whether I should fight the divorce, how I should handle the inevitable gossip that would follow a state senator's very public midlife crisis. But underneath her practical advice, I could hear the question she wasn't asking. What was I going to do with the rest of my life? "You know what I keep thinking about," I said eventually. "My grandmother's house." Orla paused mid-sip. "The one on Trad Street?" "The duplex. I inherited it when she died, but we never did anything with it. Harlan always said it wasn't worth the investment." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Funny how his opinions on my inheritance might matter. Less now. My grandmother had been Adelaide Ashford, a woman who'd survived the Depression by taking in boarders and never forgot the value of owning property outright. When she died 15 years ago, she'd left me the duplex on Trad Street, a narrow, 3-story building that had been carved into 2 mirror image units sometime in the 1920s. Harlan had been dismissive. "Old property's a money pits, Imogen. Better to let it sit than throw good money after bad." But I'd driven by it occasionally over the years, watching it slowly deteriorate. The bones were good. Classic Charleston architecture with high ceilings and original heart pine floors. The kind of place that could be beautiful again with the right vision and enough elbow grease. "Have you been inside it recently?" Orla asked. "Not for years, but I still have the keys." Something was stirring, in me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in decades. It took me a moment to recognize it as excitement. When was the last time I'd had a project that was entirely my own? When was the last time I'd created something instead of simply maintaining it? "What are you thinking?" Orla asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that maybe it's time I remembered what I used to be good at." The next morning I drove down to Trad Street. The duplex sat between a restored antebellum mansion and a narrow, single house that had been painted Charleston green. My grandmother's building looked tired. The paint was peeling. The garden had gone wild. And one of the second-floor shutters hung at an angle. But the proportions were perfect, and the morning light caught the windows in a way that made me remember why I'd fallen in love with design in the first place. I let myself in through the front door of the left unit. The interior smelled like closed spaces and old wood, but it wasn't the musty smell of decay. More like a house waiting to wake up. The front room had 12-foot ceilings and a fireplace with original marble surrounds. The kitchen was tiny but charming, with built-in cabinets that could be restored. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms shared a bathroom that would need complete renovation. The right unit was a mirror image, though someone had painted the walls an unfortunate shade of yellow at some point. But standing in the front room, looking out at the garden that would be beautiful once it was tamed, I could see it all. Not just how it could look, but how it could feel. Comfortable but elegant. Historic but livable. The kind of place that would attract people who appreciated both character and quality. I walked through both units twice, taking notes on my phone and mentally calculating what it would take to bring them up to rental standards. It would be expensive, but not impossibly so. And I had access to resources. The settlement from the divorce would be substantial, and I still had connections in the design world. More importantly, I had something I hadn't possessed in years, a sense of purpose that belonged entirely to me. When I got home, Harlan was in his study, probably drafting his explanation for why he was leaving his wife of 34 years. The official story would be carefully crafted, irreconcilable differences, a mutual decision, the kind of language that would minimize political damage. I didn't knock on his door. Instead, I called Orla. "I'm going to renovate the duplex," I told her. I'm going to turn it into the most beautiful rental property in the historic district." "That's wonderful," she said. "But are you sure you're ready for a project like that? It's been a long time since I designed anything. Since I created something? Yes, it has been a long time. Too long." I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I'd maintained, but never really made my own. I let my career disappear because I thought supporting Harlan's dreams was more important than pursuing my own. I'm not making that mistake again. "What will you do if you finish the renovation and can't find good tenants?" I smiled, surprising myself. "Then I guess I'll learn property management the same way I learned everything else, by doing it." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, researching contractors and permit requirements. Harlan emerged from his study around 10, looking rumpled and slightly guilty. "Imogen," he started. "About yesterday." "Don't," I said without looking up from my screen. "We'll have plenty of time to discuss the details with lawyers. Right now, I have work to do." He hovered in the doorway for a moment, perhaps expecting tears or recriminations. When neither came, he retreated to his study. I heard him on the phone a few minutes later, his voice low and urgent, probably calling Delphina to report that his wife was taking the news better than expected. If only he knew what I was really planning. Harlan delivered the official news on a Tuesday morning in March, as if timing could soften the blow. He'd arranged everything beforehand. The lawyer, the story for the press, even a statement about our mutual decision to pursue separate paths. I sat at our breakfast table, still in my robe, while he presented his exit strategy like a campaign proposal. "The settlement is generous," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "The house is yours, of course, plus half of everything else. My lawyer says we can keep this quiet until after the primary season." I opened the folder and scanned the documents. He was right. The financial terms were more than fair. Guilty conscience, I supposed, or perhaps just political expedience. A messy divorce could damage his chances for re-election, and Harlan had never been one to let personal feelings interfere with strategic planning. "When are you moving out?" I asked. "This weekend. I found a temporary place." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Imogen, I know this is difficult, but I hope you understand." "I understand perfectly." I closed the folder and met his eyes. "You've fallen in love with someone young enough to be our daughter, and you've convinced yourself this is some kind of spiritual awakening instead of a predictable cliché. What I don't understand is why you think I need to hear your justifications." For a moment, he looked like the man I'd married, uncertain, almost vulnerable. Then his political mask slipped back into place. "I'd like to tell Beck myself before he hears it from someone else." Beck, our son, 28 years old and teaching high school history in Mount Pleasant. He'd inherited my sense of justice and Harlan's stubborn streak, a combination that made him fiercely protective of the people he loved. This would break his heart. "Do what you think is best," I said, "but don't expect me to help you explain it." After Harlan left for his office, I called in sick to the gallery where I'd been working part-time. It wasn't technically a lie. I felt sick to my core, though not in any way that bed rest would cure. Instead, I drove back to the duplex on Trad Street. In daylight, the building's potential was even clearer. The architecture was classic Charleston, narrow and tall, with a side piazza that caught the morning light. The garden was overgrown but full of possibilities. Camellia bushes that could be shaped, ancient oak trees that provided perfect shade, even a few struggling rose bushes that might bloom again with proper care. I was measuring the front room when someone knocked on the door. Through the wavy glass, I could see a man in work clothes holding what looked like a toolbox. "Ma'am?" I'm Langston Merrick. I was supposed to meet someone here about renovation work. I opened the door to find a man around my age with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered hands that suggested real craftsmanship rather than weekend hobbies. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said. "I didn't call anyone." He frowned and pulled out his phone. "Orla Quinlan called me yesterday. Said her friend Imogen needed someone to look at a historic property." Of course, Orla had taken it upon herself to accelerate my timeline. I should have been annoyed, but instead I found myself smiling. "She did she? Well, as long as you're here, would you mind taking a look around?" Langston Merrick moved through the duplex like someone who understood old buildings. He ran his hands along the walls, checking for structural issues. He tested the floors for soft spots and examined the windows for signs of rot. His assessment was thorough and honest. The electrical needed updating. The plumbing was serviceable but old, and the roof would need attention within a few years. "The bones are excellent," he said finally. "Whoever built this knew what they were doing. With the right approach, this could be something special." "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" "Depends on how much you want to change. If you're looking for basic renovation, updated kitchens and baths, new electrical, refinished floors, I'd say 4 to 6 months. Longer if you want to restore original details." I wanted to restore everything. I wanted this building to remember what it had been while becoming something new. The parallel to my own situation wasn't lost on me. "I'd like to do it right," I said. "I'd rather take longer and create something beautiful than rush and compromise the vision." He nodded approvingly. "That's the approach I prefer. Too many people want everything yesterday, and the work suffers." We spent the next hour discussing possibilities. Langston had ideas I hadn't considered. Opening up the wall between the kitchen and dining room in each unit, adding built-in bookcases, creating a shared garden space that both tenants could enjoy. He spoke about the building with genuine affection, the way people talk about old friends they're eager to help. "Can I ask what inspired this project?" he said as we stood in the garden, looking back at the building. I considered how much to share. "My marriage is ending. I need something that's entirely mine." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. That must be difficult." "It is, but also liberating." The admission surprised me. I hadn't realized I felt that way until I said it out loud. "I went through something similar a few years ago," he said. "Not divorce. My wife died. Cancer. But afterward I had to figure out who I was when I wasn't half of a couple anymore. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. It was hard, but it taught me something important. Sometimes the life we think we want isn't the life we actually need." That afternoon I met Beck for coffee at a place in Mount Pleasant he'd suggested. He was already there when I arrived, hunched over his laptop grading papers. At 28, he had Harlan's height and my dark hair, but his temperament was entirely his own. Thoughtful, principled, sometimes to a fault. "Dad called," he said without looking up from his computer. "He told me about the divorce." I sat down across from him and waited. Beck had inherited my preference for processing emotions internally before speaking them aloud. "He said you two grew apart," he continued. "That you want different things now." "Is that what he said?" Beck closed his laptop and finally met my eyes. "That's what he said. But I've known Dad my whole life, and I've never seen him lie quite that smoothly. So, I'm asking you, what really happened?" I told him the truth. Not the painful details, but the essential facts. Harlan had fallen in love with someone else. He was leaving our marriage for a woman named Delphina Reeve. The divorce was his choice, not mine. Beck was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. How old is she? 29. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jesus, she's younger than I am. Beck, no, I get it. Midlife crisis. Dad feels old. Young woman makes him feel vital again. It's such a fucking cliché. He caught himself and glanced around the coffee shop. Sorry, I thought he was better than that. So did I. Are you okay? I mean, really okay? I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? My marriage was ending. My life was changing in ways I couldn't predict. And I was about to embark on a renovation project that would consume months of my time and thousands of dollars. By most measures, I should have been falling apart. Instead, I felt more focused than I had in years. I'm going to be okay, I said. I'm renovating your great-grandmother's duplex, turning it into rental property. Beck brightened. The one on Trad Street. I remember playing there when I was little. Grandmama Adelaide always said it had good bones. It does, and I'm going to make it beautiful again. Will you live there? Maybe eventually. For now, I think I need to finish one chapter before I start the next. We talked for another hour about practical things. Would I keep the house on Lagar Street? Did I need help with the renovation? How would we handle holidays now that the family was splitting apart? Beck was hurt, but he was also pragmatic. He'd inherited enough of Harlan's political instincts to understand that life rarely followed the script we wrote for it. As I drove home, I thought about Delphina Reeve again. The name still bothered me, like a word on the tip of my tongue that wouldn't quite surface. That evening, I went through my old client files, looking for anything that might jog my memory. I found it in a folder from 8 years ago. Delphina Reed. Close enough that I'd misremembered the surname. She'd been an intern at Morrison. Associates, the architectural firm I'd collaborated with on a historic home restoration in the Garden District. 21 years old then. Eager and bright, full of questions about how to break into the design world. I remembered her now. Tall and slender, with that particular kind of energy that comes from believing the world is full of possibilities waiting to be discovered. She'd shadowed me for a week, taking notes on everything from fabric selection to client management. I'd liked her enthusiasm, her genuine curiosity about the creative process. You have real instincts for this work, I'd told her on her last day. If you decide to pursue design, you should call me. I'd be happy to recommend some programs. She'd never called. Instead, apparently, she'd decided to pursue my husband. The irony was almost beautiful in its completeness. The woman who was ending, my marriage was someone I'd once mentored, however briefly, someone whose career I'd encouraged, someone who'd learned from watching me work, watching me create, watching me transform spaces into something better than they'd been before. Now she was transforming my life, though probably not in the way either of us had intended. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my kitchen, looking out at the garden in the fading light. Tomorrow I would start the renovation. I would take my grandmother's neglected building and make it beautiful again. I would create something lasting and valuable and entirely my own. And if the universe had a sense of humor, which it clearly did, maybe someday I'd find the perfect tenants for my restored duplex. Maybe a couple looking for a fresh start in a beautiful, historic building. Maybe a state senator and his young girlfriend who didn't realize their new landlord was the woman whose life they'd helped to shatter. The thought made me smile for the first time in days. The renovation began on a Monday morning in early April with the arrival of a dumpster that took up half the street. Langston had warned me that the first phase would be mostly demolition, tearing out damaged plaster, removing outdated fixtures, exposing the bones of the building so we could see what we were really working with. I'd taken a leave of absence from the gallery, using the excuse of family matters that wasn't entirely untrue. My family was indeed in shambles, but for the first time in years, I was building something instead of watching it fall apart. "You sure you want to be here for this?" Langston asked as his crew unloaded sledgehammers and pry bars. "Demo day can be pretty brutal." "I'm sure." I tied my hair back and put on the work gloves I'd bought the night before. "This is my project. I want to be part of every step." The first swing of the hammer through the kitchen wall of the left unit was profoundly satisfying. Years of frustration and disappointment seemed to flow out of me with each impact. By noon, we'd exposed the original brick chimney that had been hidden behind decades of unfortunate renovations. By evening, the first floor was stripped down to its essential elements: beautiful proportions, solid construction, and endless possibilities. "Look at this," Langston called from the front room. He'd been carefully removing layers of wallpaper and had uncovered something unexpected. Your grandmother had good taste. Underneath the paper was original plasterwork, decorative molding around the ceiling that had been painted over so many times. It looked like simple trim. But as Langston carefully scraped away the paint, intricate patterns emerged. Acanthus, leaves, and geometric designs that spoke to the building's 1920s origins. "We can restore this," he said. "It'll take time, but it's worth saving." I ran my fingers along the emerging pattern, thinking about my grandmother. Adelaide Ashford had lived through the Depression, 2 wars, and the massive social changes that transformed Charleston from a sleepy southern city into a tourist destination. She'd adapted to everything, without losing her sense of what mattered. Maybe that's what I was learning to do. Orla stopped by around lunchtime with sandwiches and unsolicited opinions about my progress. "You look better," she announced, studying my dust-covered clothes and paint-streaked hair. "Less like a woman whose husband left her, more like a woman with a plan." "I do have a plan. Restore the duplex, find good tenants, start the next chapter of my life. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "What about the current chapter? Have you heard from Harlan since he moved out?" I hadn't. He'd taken his clothes and his political memorabilia and disappeared into whatever temporary life he'd arranged with Delphina. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of him on the news, giving quotes about upcoming legislation or attending ribbon cuttings. He looked happy, or at least he looked like a man playing the role of someone happy. "I don't need to hear from him," I said. "We're communicating through lawyers now." "That's probably healthier." Orla examined the exposed brick chimney with professional interest. "This place is going to be gorgeous when you're finished. Have you thought about how you'll market it?" I was planning to handle it myself. "Absolutely not!" She waved her hand dismissively. "Property management is a business, Imogen. You need someone who knows the market, who can screen tenants properly, who understands landlord law. Lucky for you, I've been thinking about expanding my services." This was news to me. "Since when?" "Since I realized the travel business is changing, and I need to diversify. High-end property management for historic homes could be very lucrative. We could be partners." The offer was tempting. Orla had excellent business instincts and a network of connections throughout Charleston. She also had a talent for reading people that would be invaluable in screening potential tenants. "Partners, in what sense?" "You handle the creative vision and property maintenance. I handle marketing, tenant relations, and financial management." 60-40 split in your favor since it's your building. I'll think about it. Think fast. This place is going to be stunning, and stunning properties in the historic district don't stay vacant long. That afternoon, I worked alongside Langston's crew, learning to use tools I'd never touched before. There was something deeply satisfying about physical labor. The immediate results, the clear progress from 1 hour to the next. In my old career, design projects could take months to complete, and were often compromised by client preferences or budget constraints. Here, every decision was mine. Langston worked beside me, teaching me to recognize which walls were load-bearing and which could be removed. He had a way of explaining complex structural concepts that made them accessible, without being condescending. When I asked why he'd become a carpenter, he smiled and said he'd always preferred building things to talking about them. "I played jazz piano for 20 years, he said as we carefully removed original hardwood flooring to be refinished. Traveled all over the Southeast, made decent money, met interesting people. But when my wife got sick, I realized I wanted to create something more permanent. Music disappears when the last note fades. Buildings last. Do you miss performing? Sometimes. But I still play for myself. And there's music in this kind of work, too. The rhythm of a well-coordinated crew. The harmony of good design. Different. Instruments. Same satisfaction. By the end of the first week, both units were stripped down to their essentials. The exposed brick, original hardwood, and decorative plasterwork revealed the building's true character. It was like meeting my grandmother's house for the first time. Beck came by on Saturday to see the progress. He moved through the space with the same appreciation for craftsmanship that I'd inherited from my grandmother, running his hands along the exposed beams and admiring the way light fell through the tall windows. "This is going to be incredible," he said. "Are you planning to live here yourself?" "Maybe eventually. Right now, I'm focused on making it perfect for whoever does live here." "Have you heard from Dad lately?" I set down the paint scraper I'd been using and looked at my son. At 28, he was old enough to understand the complexities of adult relationships, but young enough to still believe his parents should have found a way to make their marriage work. "We don't really talk anymore," I said. "How is he doing?" "Confused, I think. He keeps asking if I'm angry with him." "Are you?" Beck considered this. "I'm disappointed. I thought he was smarter than this. But angry? Not really. People make choices, and sometimes those choices hurt other people. Doesn't mean they're evil, just human." His maturity surprised me sometimes. When had my son become wise enough to forgive his father's failings? "What about Delphina?" I asked. "Have you met her?" "Briefly. She's enthusiastic. Very into wellness and spiritual growth and finding your authentic self. She talks a lot about energy and manifestation and chakras. I tried to picture Harlan. Pragmatic, political, often cynical Harlan, listening to lectures about chakras. The image was almost funny. "Do they seem happy?" "They seem like two people trying very hard to convince themselves they're happy." Beck picked up a piece of the original crown molding that we'd carefully removed. "This is beautiful. You're really going to restore all of it?" "Every piece. Your great-grandmother deserves nothing less." The second week brought unexpected challenges. The electrical system was worse than anticipated, requiring a complete rewiring that would add weeks to the timeline and thousands to the budget. The plumbing in the upstairs bathroom of the right unit had been leaking into the walls for years, causing water damage that hadn't been visible from the surface. "These old buildings always have surprises," Langston said as we surveyed the extent of the plumbing damage. The good news is, we're catching problems now, instead of after tenants move in. I appreciated his optimism, but the mounting costs were beginning to concern me. The divorce settlement would cover the renovation, but not by much. If we encountered any more major problems, I'd have to make compromises I didn't want to make. That evening, I sat in my kitchen on Lagar Street, surrounded by contractor estimates and design sketches. The house felt too big and too quiet without Harlan's presence. Not because I missed him exactly, but because the space was designed for a life I was no longer living. My phone rang. Orla, of course. How's the money situation? She asked without preamble. Tighter than I'd like. The electrical and plumbing issues are eating into my contingency fund. All the more reason to partner with me. I've been doing research on comparable rentals in the historic district. If we market this properly, you could charge premium rates. The return on investment will be excellent. Assuming we can finish the renovation without going over budget. Imogen, listen to me. This project isn't just about creating rental income. It's about proving to yourself that you can build something beautiful and valuable on your own. Don't let financial concerns make you compromise your vision. She was right, of course. This renovation had become about more than money or property. Management. It was about reclaiming the part of myself I'd set aside during my marriage. Every carefully restored piece of molding, every perfectly aligned tile, every thoughtful design decision was evidence that I still knew how to create something meaningful. The next morning, I called Langston and told him to proceed with the full restoration, regardless of cost. We would save every piece of original detail we could find. We would source period-appropriate fixtures and hardware. We would take the time to do everything right. You won't regret it, he said. This building has been waiting a long time for someone to love it properly. As I hung up the phone, I realized he could have been talking about more than just the building. By May, the duplex had begun its transformation from architectural skeleton to living space. The electrical work was complete. The plumbing had been updated, and we'd started the careful process of restoring original details. Each day brought small revelations: a stained glass window that had been painted over, hardware that cleaned up beautifully, heart pine floors that gleamed like honey. Once they were properly refinished, I found myself spending more time at the duplex than at home. There was something therapeutic about the steady rhythm of renovation work, the way each completed task brought visible progress. Unlike my marriage, which had deteriorated so gradually, I'd barely noticed until it was beyond repair. The building's improvement was dramatic and immediate. Langston and I had developed an easy working relationship. He handled the technical aspects of the renovation, while I focused on design decisions, paint colors, light fixtures, the hundreds of small choices that would determine whether the finished space felt authentic or artificial. He had good instincts and never pushed back when I insisted on more expensive options, understanding that quality was more important to me than speed. You have a gift for this, he said one afternoon, as we installed the restored crown molding in the left unit's front room. I've worked with a lot of designers over the years, and most of them think renovation is about imposing their vision on a space. You're listening to what the building wants to be. The compliment warmed me more than it should have. It had been a long time since anyone had recognized my professional skills as valuable. Orla had officially joined the project as my business partner, bringing her considerable organizational skills to bear on permits, inspections, and the mountain of paperwork that accompanied any historic renovation. She'd also begun developing our marketing strategy, taking photographs of the work in progress and building anticipation among her network of potential tenants. I've already had 3 inquiries, she told me over lunch at a cafe near the duplex. "Word is getting out that something special is happening on Trad Street." "It's too early for inquiries. We won't be ready for tenants until late summer." "It's never too early to build demand, especially for a property like this." She pulled out her phone and showed me a social media post she had created. The photograph showed the left unit's front room, with afternoon light streaming through the tall windows, highlighting the restored plasterwork and gleaming floors. "I'm positioning this as historic luxury, the kind of place where people don't just live, they belong." I studied the image. Even unfinished, the space had undeniable charm. The careful restoration had preserved the building's 1920s character while updating it for contemporary comfort. When complete, it would attract tenants who appreciated both beauty and authenticity. "What kind of rent are you thinking?" I asked. "For units this size, in this location, with this level of finish? I'd say $3,500 for each unit, maybe more if we include parking and garden access." The number was higher than I'd expected. High enough to make the renovation financially worthwhile, but also high enough to limit our potential tenant pool to people with substantial incomes, young professionals, empty nesters, maybe academics with family money, the kind of people who would appreciate what we were creating. That evening, I was alone in the building, touching up paint in the upstairs bedroom of the right unit, when I heard footsteps on the front porch. Through the window, I could see a woman examining the garden with obvious interest. She was tall and slender, probably in her late 20s, with long blonde hair in the kind of effortless style that suggested both confidence and money. I went downstairs to see what she wanted. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Delphina Reeve. I live nearby, and I've been watching the renovation with such interest. This building is becoming absolutely gorgeous." My heart stopped. Delphina Reeve. The woman who had destroyed my marriage was standing on my front porch, complimenting my work. "Thank you." I managed, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I know this is presumptuous, but do you happen to know if the units will be available for rent? My partner and I are looking for something in the historic district, and this is exactly the kind of place we've been hoping to find." Her partner. Harlan was her partner now. "I believe the owner is planning to rent them," I said carefully. "But the renovation won't be complete for several months." "Of course. Could I possibly take a look inside? I promise I won't disturb your work." I should have said no. I should have told her to contact the owner through proper channels. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Of course, but please be careful. We're still in the middle of construction." I showed her through both units, watching as she exclaimed over the restored details and asked intelligent questions about the design choices. She had a good eye, I had to admit. She understood what made the space special. The way the light moved through the rooms, the elegant proportions, the seamless blend of historic character and modern convenience. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she said as we finished the tour in the garden. "Would it be possible to speak with the owner about availability?" "I can pass along your information," I said. "What should I tell them about your situation?" "My partner works in government, and I run a wellness consulting business. We're financially stable, excellent tenants, very quiet. We just want a beautiful space that feels like home. Government work." She was being deliberately vague, probably because she didn't want to drop Harlan's name to someone she didn't know. Smart, considering how messy political divorces could become. "I'll let the owner know you're interested," I said. "They'll probably want references and financial information." "Of course. Here's my card." She handed me a business card, that read, Delphina Reeve, Wellness Coaching and Spiritual Guidance. Thank you so much for showing me around. This place is going to be truly special. After she left, I sat in the garden, holding her business card and trying to process what had just happened. The woman who had ended my marriage wanted to rent my property. She had stood in the rooms I was creating and declared them perfect for the life she was building with my ex-husband. The situation was so absurd it would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. I called Orla immediately. She what? Orla's voice rose an octave. Delphina Reeve came to the duplex, and you showed her around? I didn't know what else to do. She was right there on the porch, asking about rental availability. Did she recognize you? I don't think so. It's been 8 years since she interned with me, and I look different now. Besides, she doesn't know I'm the owner. This is either the worst possible development or the best possible opportunity. I could practically hear Orla's mind working through the implications. What are you thinking? I wasn't sure what I was thinking. The rational response would be to tell Delphina that the units weren't available, to find other tenants who wouldn't constantly remind me of my failed marriage. But something about her presence in my building had stirred emotions I couldn't quite identify. Not anger, exactly. Not revenge. Something more complex. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that maybe the universe has a sense of humor. You're not seriously considering renting to them. Why not? They're looking for a beautiful place to live. I'm creating beautiful places to live. They'd probably be good tenants. Imogen, this is your ex-husband we're talking about. The man who left you for a younger woman. You want to become his landlord? When she put it that way, it did sound absurd. But there was something appealing about the idea of Harlan and Delphina living in a space I had created, paying rent that would support my new independence. They would be helping to fund the life I was building, without them. Let me think about it, I said. That night I lay in bed considering the possibilities. If I rented to them, I would have to interact with them regularly, collecting rent, handling maintenance issues, dealing with the inevitable problems that arose between landlords and tenants. I would have to watch them build their new life together in a space that represented my own rebirth. But I would also have a certain power in the relationship. They would need my approval, my cooperation, my goodwill. For once they would be dependent on me rather than the other way around. The idea was intriguing enough to keep me awake most of the night. The next morning I found Langston in the left unit's kitchen, installing the custom cabinetry we'd commissioned from a local craftsman. The cabinets were painted soft sage green with brass hardware, a combination that felt both timeless and fresh. These are beautiful, I said, running my hand along the smooth finish. The carpenter did excellent work. They should last for decades. He paused in his installation to look at me. You seem distracted today. Everything all right? I almost told him about Delphina's visit, but something held me back. Langston and I had become friends over the course of the renovation, but I wasn't ready to share the complexities of my personal situation. Not yet. Just tired, I said. This project is taking more out of me than I expected. Renovation is exhausting, especially when you're emotionally invested in the outcome. But you're in the home stretch now. Another month and this place will be perfect. Perfect. The word carried more weight than he knew. I was creating something, perfect for people who had shattered my imperfect life. The irony was almost poetic. That afternoon, Beck called to check on my progress. He'd been supportive of the renovation project, understanding instinctively that I needed something constructive to focus on during the divorce proceedings. "How's the building coming along?" he asked. "Nearly finished. It's going to be beautiful. And you're still planning to rent it out?" "That's the plan. I had someone inquire about availability yesterday, actually." "Anyone interesting?" I hesitated. Beck didn't know the details of his father's relationship with Delphina, and I wasn't sure how much to share. "Just someone who appreciates good design. That's what you want in a tenant. Someone who'll respect what you've created. If only it were that simple." The rental application arrived by email 3 days later, sent through Orla's new property management account. I opened it with the same mixture of curiosity and dread I might have felt reading a medical test result. Delphina Reeve and Harlan Vale. She'd listed him by his full name, probably assuming it would impress potential landlords. Their combined income was substantial, their credit scores excellent, their references impeccable. On paper, they were ideal tenants, model citizens seeking a model home. I printed the application and spread it across my kitchen table, studying every detail. Harlan's employment was listed as State Senator, South Carolina General Assembly, with his government salary dutifully reported. Delphina described herself as founder and principal, Reeve Wellness Consulting, with an impressive annual income that suggested her spiritual guidance business was more lucrative than I'd expected. Under previous residences, Harlan had listed our Lagar Street address, noting that he'd lived there for 15 years. He'd listed his previous landlord as N.A., owner occupied. The casualness of it stung. 15 years reduced to a line on a form. 34 years of marriage dismissed as simply owner occupied. Their reason for moving was listed as seeking appropriate space for new life phase. I almost laughed at the euphemism. The references were particularly illuminating. Delphina had listed 3 former clients, all with hyphenated last names and addresses in affluent neighborhoods. Harlan had provided references from 2 fellow senators and his campaign manager. People who would vouch for his character without knowing about the personal chaos he'd created. But it was the section labeled Additional Information that gave me pause. Delphina had written a brief paragraph about their housing needs. "We are seeking a peaceful, beautiful space that supports personal growth and authentic living. We value historic architecture and thoughtful design. We are quiet, respectful tenants who treat every home as sacred space." Sacred space. She wanted to make my building sacred to her relationship with my ex-husband, Orla called while I was still staring at the application. "Well?" she said without preamble. "What do you think?" "I think they look like excellent tenants on paper." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it. Are you seriously considering this?" I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the garden I'd maintained for 15 years. In a few months, Harlan would be gone from this house entirely, and I would have to decide what to do with all this space. Keep it and rattle around alone? Sell it and start over somewhere smaller? The future felt full of questions I wasn't ready to answer. "What would you do?" I asked Orla. "Honestly, I think I'd rent to them. Not because it's wise, but because it's poetic. They destroyed your old life, so now they get to pay for your new one." "That sounds awfully mercenary." "Sometimes mercenary is what the situation calls for. Besides, think about it practically. They're going to rent somewhere in Charleston. Harlan's political career requires it. Wouldn't you rather have them paying your mortgage than someone else's?" She had a point. The rent from the duplex would more than cover the property taxes and maintenance costs, with enough left over to provide meaningful supplemental income. And given Harlan's public profile, They would be motivated to be model tenants. The last thing a state senator needed was a dispute with his landlord making local news. "There's something else you should consider," Orla continued. "If you don't rent to them, someone else will ask why. The historic district rental market isn't that big. People talk. Eventually someone would figure out the connection, and then you'd have gossip to deal with instead of just tenants." More practical considerations. Orla was right. Charleston's social circles were small and interconnected. My divorce from Harlan was already generating whispered conversations at gallery openings and charity events. Better to control the narrative by making a clear, decisive choice. "I need to think about it," I said. "Don't think too long. Applications like this don't come along often." That evening I drove to the duplex for what had become my nightly inspection. The building was nearly complete now. Just final touch-ups, and the installation of the last fixtures remained. In the golden light of late afternoon, it looked exactly as I'd envisioned. Elegant without being pretentious, historic without being dated, comfortable without being ordinary. I walked through both units, imagining them filled with furniture and life. The left unit would be perfect for a couple. The main bedroom was spacious and bright. The second bedroom could serve as an office or guest room. The right unit had a similar layout but felt slightly more intimate, maybe better suited to a single person or young couple just starting out. Langston found me in the garden, where I was deadheading the roses that had responded beautifully to the attention I'd given them during the renovation. "Building's looking good," he said, settling onto the bench we'd installed beneath the old oak tree. "You should be proud of what you've accomplished here." "Thank you. And thank you for everything you've done. I couldn't have managed this without your expertise." "It's been a pleasure. Not often I get to work on a project where the owner cares this much about getting every detail right." He paused, studying my expression. "But you seem troubled tonight. Second thoughts about becoming a landlord?" I considered how much to share. Over the past 3 months, Langston and I had developed the kind of friendship that grows from working closely together toward a common goal. He was thoughtful, reliable, and refreshingly direct. Perhaps it was time to trust him with the truth. "I have an application from my ex-husband and his girlfriend," I said. "They want to rent the upstairs unit." Langston was quiet for a long moment. "That's complicated." That's one word for it. "Do you want to rent to them?" I'm not sure what I want. Part of me thinks it would be satisfying to have them paying rent to support my independence. Part of me thinks it would be torture to have constant reminders of what happened to my marriage. What does your gut tell you? I thought about that. My gut had been unreliable lately, clouded by hurt and uncertainty. But sitting in the garden I'd helped restore, looking at the building I'd brought back to life, I felt something that might have been clarity. My gut tells me that this place deserves tenants who will appreciate what it's become. And whatever else they are, they're people who value beautiful spaces. Langston nodded slowly. That's a generous way to look at it. Or a practical one. Good tenants are hard to find, and personal feelings don't pay the mortgage. True. But you should know, if you decide to rent to them, it won't be easy. Landlord-tenant relationships are complicated enough without personal history. I know. But maybe that's exactly what I need. A relationship with clear boundaries and defined expectations. No ambiguity about roles or responsibilities. We sat, in comfortable silence, watching the evening light fade through the oak leaves. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. Normal life continuing around the small revolution I was creating in my own existence. "Can I ask you something?" Langston said eventually. Of course. Are you doing this because you want to punish them? Or because you want to prove something to yourself? The question went straight to the heart of my uncertainty. Was this about revenge or redemption? About power or healing? I think, I said slowly, I'm doing it because I want to find out who I am when I'm not trying to please anyone else. For 34 years, I made decisions based on what would be best for my marriage, what would support Harlan's career, what would maintain the life we'd built together. Now I get to make decisions based on what's best for me. And what would be best for you? I looked at the building we'd transformed together, thinking about all the choices that had brought us to this moment. The decision to renovate rather than sell. The choice to preserve original details rather than modernize. The commitment to quality over speed, authenticity over convenience. What would be best for me, I said, is to trust my instincts and see what happens. The next morning I called Orla with my decision. I want to rent to them, I said, but I want to do it properly. Full background checks, credit verification, references contacted, and I want to meet with them in person before making a final decision. Under what name? I'd been thinking about that. Using my real name would reveal the connection immediately, but using a completely false identity felt unnecessarily deceptive. There was a middle ground that appealed to me. Imogen Ashford, I said. My maiden name. Technically true, and unlikely to trigger recognition. Perfect. And if they figure out who you are? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I suspect they're so focused on their new life together that the past isn't much on their minds. Orla scheduled the meeting for the following Saturday at the duplex. I would present myself as the property manager representing the owner, Ms. Ashford. Delphina and Harlan would tour the completed units and discuss their housing needs. Everyone would be professional and courteous. Just another routine landlord-tenant interaction. What could possibly go wrong? Saturday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive July heat that makes Charleston feel like a greenhouse. I dressed carefully for the meeting. A simple navy dress, minimal jewelry. My hair pulled back in a professional style that I hoped would make me less recognizable. Standing in front of my bedroom mirror, I practiced introducing myself as Imogen Ashford, property manager for the owner. The lie felt strange on my tongue, but not entirely false. I was managing the property, and Imogen Ashford was my name, technically speaking. If Harlan noticed the resemblance to his ex-wife's maiden name, he would probably assume it was coincidence. After 34 years of marriage, he'd become remarkably good at not seeing things he didn't want to see. I arrived at the duplex an hour early to make final preparations. Orla met me there with fresh flowers for both units and a bottle of wine for my nerves. You don't have to do this, she said, arranging white hydrangeas in the front room of the left unit. We could still find other tenants. I want to do this. I was surprised to realize it was true. Over the past week, my initial uncertainty had crystallized into something approaching excitement. I need to know if I can handle being in the same room with them without falling apart. And if you can't, then I'll learn something important about my own limitations. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard car doors slam outside. Through the front window, I watched Harlan and Delphina approach the building. He looked the same as always, tall, distinguished, dressed in the kind of casual clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent. She was even more striking than I'd remembered, moving with the kind of confident grace that comes from being young and beautiful and convinced the world is designed for your pleasure. They knocked, and I opened the door with what I hoped was a professional smile. Mr. Vale? Ms. Reeve? I'm Imogen Ashford. Thank you for coming. Harlan's eyes passed over me without recognition. We shook hands like strangers, his familiar grip now foreign and formal. Delphina was warm and effusive, complimenting the building's exterior and expressing excitement about seeing the interior. "The renovation is just gorgeous," she said, as I led them into the left unit's front room. "You can feel the love that went into every detail, if only she knew." I gave them the full tour, pointing out restored features and modern conveniences with the practiced patter I'd developed over months of working on the building. Harlan asked practical questions about utilities and parking. Delphina focused on the aesthetic elements, running her hands along the restored molding and exclaiming over the way light moved through the rooms. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she said as we stood in the main bedroom. "Harlan, isn't this perfect?" Harlan was examining the ensuite bathroom we'd added, noting the period-appropriate fixtures and heated floors. "It's very well done," he admitted. "The renovation is clearly high quality." "The owner spared no expense," I said. "She wanted to honor the building's history while creating modern comfort." "She?" Delphina asked. "The owner is a woman?" "Yes, a local interior designer who inherited the property from her grandmother. This was a passion project for her." Harlan emerged from the bathroom, his attention already moving to practical concerns. "What's included in the rent? Utilities? Parking?" I outlined the lease terms Orla and I had developed. Rent would include water and garbage collection, but not electricity or gas. Each unit came with one assigned parking space in the rear courtyard. The garden was shared space, maintained by the owner. Pets were negotiable depending on size and temperament. "What about the lease length?" Harlan asked. "The owner prefers a 1-year minimum, with options to renew. She's looking for stable, long-term tenants who will appreciate the space." "That sounds perfect," Delphina said. "We're hoping to stay in Charleston for the foreseeable future. Harlan's work keeps us here, and I'm building my practice locally. Her practice." I wondered how many clients she had, how she'd built such a successful business in just a few years. Then I remembered the networking skills she'd displayed during her internship with me, the way she'd connected with everyone she met, the enthusiasm that made people want to help her succeed. "What kind of work do you do, Ms. Reeve?" I asked, though I already knew. "I'm a wellness coach and spiritual guide. I help people align their lives with their authentic purpose." She glanced at Harlan with obvious affection. It's been wonderful helping Harlan discover new aspects of himself. The irony was breathtaking. She was presenting herself as someone who helped people find authenticity while living in a relationship built on betrayal and deception. But perhaps that was unfair. Maybe she genuinely believed that helping Harlan leave his marriage was a form of spiritual guidance. "That sounds fascinating," I said. We moved to the second unit, which had a slightly different layout but the same attention to detail. Delphina immediately gravitated toward the smaller bedroom, which had built-in bookcases and a window seat. "Overlooking the garden, this could be my office," she said. "The energy in here is perfect for client sessions." "The owner has excellent taste," Harlan noted, examining the kitchen fixtures. "Everything is top quality but appropriate to the period." "She's very passionate about historic preservation," I said. "This building has been in her family for generations." "Is she from Charleston originally?" Delphina asked. "Born and raised. She understands what makes this city special." We finished the tour in the garden, where I explained the maintenance arrangements and outdoor space usage. Delphina was clearly enchanted by the setting. The restored brick pathways, the climbing roses, the ancient oak that provided natural air conditioning, even on the hottest days. This is like something from a magazine, she said. I can already imagine having morning coffee out here, maybe doing some yoga under the tree. The owner wanted to create a sense of sanctuary, I said. A place where people could feel peaceful and grounded. It's perfect, Delphina declared. Harlan, don't you think this is perfect? Harlan was studying the lease terms I'd provided, his political mind already working through potential complications. The rent is substantial, he said. It's fair for the location and quality, I replied. Comparable properties in the historic district are renting for similar amounts, and most don't have this level of finish or outdoor space. We can afford it, Delphina said quickly. And it's worth paying more for a place that feels like home. Home. The word hit me harder than I'd expected. They wanted to make their home in a space I'd created, using skills I'd developed over decades of practice. They would wake up every morning in rooms I'd designed, walk on floors I'd refinished, enjoy garden spaces I'd restored. But they would also be paying me for the privilege. Every month they would write a check that funded my independence. Their rent would cover my property taxes, my insurance, my utilities. In a very real sense, they would be supporting the life I was building without them. What's the next step? Harlan asked. I'll need to verify your references and run credit checks, I said. Assuming everything is in order, we could have a lease, ready for signature by the end of next week. That would be wonderful, Delphina said. We're so excited about this opportunity. They left with promises to provide additional documentation and expressions of enthusiasm for becoming tenants. I watched them drive away, Delphina's hand on Harlan's arm as she no doubt shared her excitement about their future home. Orla emerged from the right unit, where she'd been hiding during the meeting. Well, she said. How do you feel? I considered the question. How did I feel? Not angry, which surprised me. Not heartbroken, which surprised me more. Instead, I felt something that might have been relief. Relief that I could be in the same room with them without falling apart. Relief that I could maintain professional composure while discussing practical matters. Relief that the building I'd worked so hard to restore would be appreciated by people who understood its value. I feel like I just passed an important test, I said. You were brilliant, professional, knowledgeable, completely unrecognizable. Even I almost believed you were just a property manager. The funny thing is, watching them tour the space, I felt proud. They clearly love what I've created here, even if they don't know I created it. That means something. It means you're a gracious woman with excellent taste in renovation projects, Orla said. But are you sure you want to go through with this? It's not too late to change your mind. I looked at the building one more time, taking in the restored facade and flourishing garden. In a few weeks it would be someone's home. Whether that someone was Harlan and Delphina or complete strangers didn't change the fact that I'd brought this place back to life. I'd taken something neglected and made it beautiful again. Maybe that was what I was doing with my own life, too. I'm sure, I said. Let's check their references and draw up the lease. That evening, I called Beck to tell him about the day's developments. I'd been debating how much to share with him, but he deserved to know what was happening. You're going to be Dad's landlord? He said after I'd explained the situation. That's either the most mature thing I've ever heard, or the most diabolical. I prefer to think of it as practical. Does he know it's you? Not yet. I'm using my maiden name for the property management business. Beck was quiet for a moment. This could get complicated when he figures it out, and he will figure it out eventually. Maybe. But by then they'll have signed a lease and moved in. It'll be harder to back out. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I've had time to think about a lot of things lately. Are you happy? The question was simple but loaded with concern. I mean, really happy? Not just putting on a brave face? I considered his question seriously. Was I happy? The last few months had been difficult, sometimes devastating, but they'd also been transformative in ways I was still discovering. I'm getting there, I said, for the first time in years. I feel like I'm moving towards something instead of just maintaining the status quo. That has to count for something. It counts for a lot. And for what it's worth, I think you're handling all of this with incredible grace. Grace. It wasn't a word I would have applied to my recent decisions, but maybe Beck was right. Maybe there was grace in choosing to build something beautiful instead of tearing something down. Maybe there was grace in creating opportunity from betrayal, in finding power through service rather than revenge. Or maybe I was just rationalizing a decision that would either prove brilliant or disastrous in equal measure. Time would tell. Duff. Lease signing took place on a Thursday afternoon in late July, in the front room of what would soon become Harlan and Delphina's new home. I'd arranged the papers on the restored dining table, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon light that streamed through the tall windows. The scene was perfect, professional, elegant, charged with the kind of significance that important. Documents deserve. Orla arrived first, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing her best, successful businesswoman outfit. She'd insisted on being present for the signing, claiming it was standard practice for property management companies. Really, she wanted front-row seats for what she'd started calling the most interesting real estate transaction in Charleston history. Ready for this? She asked, checking her watch. As ready as I'll ever be. Harlan and Delphina arrived precisely on time, which didn't surprise me. Harlan had always been punctual to a fault, treating every appointment as if it were a campaign. Event. Delphina carried a small sage bundle, which she'd probably use to cleanse the energy once the paperwork was complete. Ms. Ashford, Harlan said, extending his hand. Thank you for making this process so smooth. If he noticed that my handshake lasted a moment too long, he didn't show it. After 34 years of marriage, I knew his hands better than my own. The callus on his ring finger from his wedding band, the scar on his palm from a childhood accident, the way he held tension in his knuckles when he was nervous. He was nervous now, though trying to hide it. It's my pleasure, I said. Ms. Quinlan has prepared all the necessary documents. Orla took over with the efficiency that had made her travel business so successful. Lease terms, security deposits, move-in procedures, emergency contact information. Harlan read every clause carefully, asking questions about pet policies and subletting restrictions. Delphina was more focused on the emotional aspects, how soon they could move in, whether they could paint the walls, if she could plant herbs in the garden. The owner is very accommodating about personalization, I said, as long as any changes are reversible and don't damage original features. What about overnight guests? Delphina asked. I sometimes have clients who travel from out of town for intensive sessions. The lease allows for reasonable guest stays, Orla said. Just notify the property management company if anyone will be staying longer than 2 weeks. We worked through the documents methodically. Security deposit, first month's rent, emergency contact forms. Harlan wrote checks with the focused attention he'd once brought to reviewing legislation. His signature on the lease was firm and confident, the same signature I'd watched him practice before his first political campaign. When it came time for Delphina to sign, she paused and looked around the room one more time. This feels so right, she said. Like the universe conspired to bring us to exactly where we're supposed to be. The universe had certainly conspired, though probably not in the way she imagined. "Congratulations," I said as we finished the paperwork. "I hope you'll be very happy here." "We will be," Delphina said with absolute certainty. "This is the perfect place to start our new life together. New life." The phrase stung more than I'd expected. They were starting a new life in a space I'd created while ending my old life with the man who was now my tenant. The ironies were layering faster than I could process them. Orla popped the champagne and poured 4 glasses. "To new beginnings," she toasted. "To beautiful homes and the people who create them," Delphina added, raising her glass toward me. If only she knew. After they left carrying copies of their lease and keys to their new home, I sat in the empty space and tried to process what I'd just done. In signing those papers, I'd committed myself to a relationship with my ex-husband that would be intimate in entirely new ways. I would be responsible for maintaining the space where he slept, where he cooked breakfast, where he built his new life with another woman. He would be financially dependent on my goodwill, my competence, my willingness to keep their home functional and beautiful. "Second thoughts?" Orla asked, settling beside me on the window seat. "Third and fourth thoughts, but no regrets, not yet." "They seem happy together." "They do." It was true, and it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. During the lease signing, I'd watched Delphina and Harlan interact with the easy affection of people still discovering each other. She touched his arm when making points. He deferred to her opinion about decorating decisions. They had the slightly giddy energy of people convinced they'd figured out something everyone else had missed. Maybe they had. Maybe what they'd found together was worth the destruction of what Harlan and I had built. Maybe authentic love was worth betraying promises, worth breaking hearts, worth starting over at 62. I wasn't ready to accept that possibility, but I couldn't entirely dismiss it either. "When are they moving in?" I asked. "Next weekend. Delphina wants to have the space energetically cleansed before they bring in furniture." "Of course she does." My phone buzzed with a text from Beck. "Dad just called. He and Delphina signed a lease on a duplex in the historic district. Says it's the most beautiful place they've ever seen. Any chance this is your building?" I showed the message to Orla, who laughed despite herself. "He's going to figure it out eventually," she said. "I know, but hopefully not until after they've moved in and gotten settled. Harder to back out once you've committed." I drove home to the house on Lagar Street, which felt even emptier than usual. The settlement negotiations were nearly complete, and I would need to decide soon whether to keep the house or sell it. 6 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms for one person seemed excessive, but it was also the only home I'd known for 15 years. Leaving it would mean abandoning another piece of my old life. But maybe that's what I needed. A clean break from everything that reminded me of who I used to be. That evening, Langston called to check on the lease signing. "How did it go?" he asked. "Surprisingly well. They loved the space, signed without hesitation, and seemed genuinely excited to move in. That's wonderful. You should be proud. Creating a home that people are passionate about is no small accomplishment. Thank you. And thank you again for everything you did to make it possible. The renovation wouldn't have been the same without your expertise." It was my pleasure. Working with someone who cares about quality and authenticity made all the difference. We talked for a few more minutes about final touch-ups and move-in preparations. Langston offered to be available if any issues arose during the transition, and I found myself hoping they would. Our professional relationship was ending with the completion of the renovation, but I wasn't ready to lose the friendship we'd developed. "Can I ask you something?" he said as we were about to hang up. "Of course. Are you planning to take on more renovation projects? Because I'd love to work with you again." The question surprised me. I hadn't thought beyond finishing the duplex and finding tenants, but the idea of taking on another project was appealing. I'd rediscovered my love for design work, and I'd proven to myself that I could manage complex renovations successfully. "I might be," I said. "I'll let you know if anything comes up." "Please do. It's rare to find someone who approaches renovation with both vision and respect for what came before." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about possibilities. The duplex project had reminded me who I was before I became half of a political couple. Maybe it was time to reclaim that identity more fully. Maybe it was time to start a real business, instead of just managing one property. The next morning, I drove past the duplex to make sure everything was ready for move-in day. A large truck was parked outside, and I could see Delphina directing the placement of furniture. Even from a distance, her enthusiasm was visible, pointing, gesturing, clearly in her element as she created their new domestic space. I parked a block away and watched for a few minutes. Harlan emerged from the building carrying a box, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. He'd lost weight since our separation, and his clothes hung differently on his frame. Whether from stress or intentional change, the effect was to make him look younger, more energetic. They worked together with easy coordination, the kind of partnership that develops quickly when people are motivated by shared excitement. This was their adventure, their fresh start, their chance to build something uncomplicated by history or disappointment. I should have felt jealous watching them, but instead I felt something closer to curiosity. What would it be like to start over with someone new, to rebuild domestic life without the weight of old patterns and accumulated resentments? For a moment, I almost envied them the simplicity of their situation. Almost. Then I remembered what they'd destroyed to create their new beginning, and the moment of sympathy passed. That afternoon, Orla called with the first month's rent check. "Delivered right on time," she reported. Delphina included a thank you note for Ms. Ashford, expressing gratitude for creating such a beautiful space. What did it say? Quote, "Thank you for entrusting us with this special place. We promise to honor its beauty and fill it with love and positive energy. With gratitude, Delphina." Signed with a little heart, a thank you note from the woman who'd helped destroy my marriage, delivered with the first payment on a lease that would fund my independence. The ironies were becoming so layered I was losing track of them. "Are you going to keep the note?" Orla asked. "I think I have to. It might be evidence someday." Evidence of what? I wasn't sure. Evidence of grace under pressure. Evidence of the universe's sense of humor. Evidence that sometimes the best revenge is living well enough to collect rent from your enemies. Evidence that I survived this, I said finally. 2 months after Harlan and Delphina moved into the duplex, I realized I'd become someone I didn't entirely recognize. The woman who woke up each morning in the big house on Lagar Street was confident in ways that surprised me, focused on projects that energized rather than drained me, capable of making decisions without consulting anyone else's preferences or political calculations. The rent checks arrived promptly on the 1st of each month, delivered by Delphina with increasingly elaborate thank you notes. September's payment came with a card featuring a watercolor of the duplex and a message about how the space was nurturing their souls and supporting their journey toward authentic love. October's included a photo of herbs she'd planted in their shared garden, with appreciation for the owner's vision in creating such a sacred sanctuary. I kept the notes in a folder I'd labeled Property Management Correspondence, though Orla suggested Evidence of Cosmic Justice might be more accurate. The business partnership between Orla and me had evolved into something more substantial than either of us had anticipated. Word of the duplex renovation had spread through Charleston's interconnected social networks, and we'd received inquiries about taking on additional properties. A young couple with a neglected Victorian in Harleston Village. A retired doctor who'd inherited his grandmother's single house and wanted to convert it to rental income. A prominent attorney looking for someone to restore a historic commercial building downtown. "We should make this official," Orla said over lunch at a restaurant near Rainbow Row. "File paperwork, create a proper business structure. Maybe even hire an assistant." "Ashford and Quinlan Property Development," I suggested. "Has a nice ring to it." "I like it. Though technically, shouldn't it be Quinlan and Ashford? I am the senior partner in terms of experience. You can have top billing if you handle all the permit applications." "Deal." The success of our accidental business venture was gratifying, but it was the personal transformation that surprised me most. For the first time in decades, I was making choices based on my own interests, rather than someone else's needs. The house on Lagar Street was too big for one person, so I decided to sell it and buy something smaller. Harlan's political career had required entertaining, but I preferred quiet dinners with friends to cocktail parties with donors. My old wardrobe had been designed to project the image of a senator's wife, but I was learning to dress for my own pleasure rather than public expectations. Most unexpectedly, I was discovering that I enjoyed being single. Not the loneliness, which could be overwhelming on quiet evenings, but the freedom to structure my days according to my own rhythms. I read books without interruption, ate dinner at whatever time appealed to me, traveled to Seebeck without coordinating schedules with anyone else. There was something liberating about being responsible only for my own happiness. Langston had become a regular part of my social circle, joining Orla and me for dinners and weekend gallery walks. Our friendship had deepened beyond the professional relationship we'd built during the renovation, though neither of us had addressed the possibility of something more romantic. We were both cautious people who'd been hurt by love, content to let affection develop slowly, without pressure or expectations. "You seem different," he said one evening, as we walked through the garden behind my house. "More settled in your own skin." "I feel different. More like myself than I have in years. Who were you before, if you don't mind me asking?" I considered the question. Who had I been during my marriage to Harlan? A supporting character in someone else's story, I realized. The gracious hostess, the devoted wife, the woman who made everything look effortless while sacrificing her own ambitions for the sake of political appearances. I was someone who'd forgotten she had her own dreams, I said. It took losing everything to remember what I actually wanted. And what do you want? To create beautiful spaces for people who appreciate them, to build a business that means something, to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs. That sounds like a good life. I think it might be. The revelation that my ex-husband was my tenant might have remained secret indefinitely, if not for Beck's unexpected visit to the duplex. He'd been in the historic district for a teachers' conference and decided to stop by Harlan's new place, unannounced. Delphina answered the door and, not recognizing him, introduced herself as the tenant. "Funny story," she said, as Beck later recounted to me over dinner. She mentioned how grateful they were to the owner, a local designer named Imogen Ashford, who'd put so much love into restoring the building. I asked if she meant Imogen Ashford Vale, formerly of Lagar Street, recently divorced from a state senator. What did she say? She went very quiet and asked how I knew that information. So, I told her you were my mother. Oh, God. She got very pale and said she needed to discuss something with Harlan immediately. Then she basically shut the door in my face. I could imagine the conversation that followed. Delphina realizing that the elegant property manager she'd been writing grateful notes to was actually the ex-wife of her boyfriend. Harlan understanding that he'd been paying rent to support the independence of the woman he'd abandoned. Both of them calculating how long I'd known who they were and what my motivations might have been. "Are you going to tell them you know they know?" Beck asked. "I'm not sure. Part of me wants to let them figure out how to handle it. Part of me wants to call and discuss it directly." "What would you say?" "That I hope they're happy in their new home and that their rent checks should continue to arrive on time." Beck laughed. "You've become ruthless, Mom. I'm not sure whether to be proud or concerned. Can't you be both?" The confrontation came 2 days later. I was at the duplex checking on some landscaping work when Harlan and Delphina arrived home from what looked like an intense conversation. They saw my car parked outside and must have decided this was their opportunity to address the situation directly. "Imogen," Harlan said as I emerged from the garden. No Ms. Ashford anymore. No pretense of not knowing who I was. "Hello, Harlan. Delphina." I kept my voice calm and professional. "I was just checking on the new plantings the gardener finished this morning. We need to talk," Delphina said. Her usual sparkly enthusiasm had been replaced by something more guarded. "Of course. Would you like to go inside?" We sat in their front room, my restored front room, with the afternoon light highlighting the careful details I'd insisted on preserving. Harlan looked uncomfortable in a way I hadn't seen since his first campaign, when he was still learning how to project confidence he didn't feel. Delphina sat beside him, her usual physical ease replaced by careful posture. "We know who you are," Harlan said without preamble. "I assumed you'd figure it out eventually." "Why didn't you tell us from the beginning?" Delphina asked. "Would you have rented from me if you'd known?" They exchanged glances and I had my answer. "This is awkward for everyone," Harlan said. "Maybe we should look for somewhere else to live." "Why?" I asked. "Are you unhappy with the property? Is there something wrong with the unit?" "No, of course not. It's beautiful. But given our history... Our history is that we were married for 34 years and divorced 6 months ago. That doesn't affect your lease terms or my obligations as a landlord." Delphina leaned forward. "But doesn't this feel strange to you? Us living in a space you created?" "It feels like a business arrangement," I said. "You needed a beautiful place to live. I created a beautiful place to rent. You pay on time, you take care of the property, and I maintain it according to the lease terms. What's strange about that?" The simplicity of it seemed to catch them off guard. They'd probably been expecting drama, recriminations, some kind of emotional confrontation that would justify their discomfort. Instead, I was treating them like any other tenants, with the kind of professional courtesy that left no room for personal complications. "Are you angry?" Delphina asked quietly. I considered the question seriously. Was I angry? I had been, certainly. Furious at the betrayal, devastated by the casual cruelty of how it had been handled, humiliated by the public nature of Harlan's midlife crisis. But sitting in the room I'd restored, looking at the life I'd built from the wreckage of my marriage, I realized the anger had transformed into something else. "I'm grateful," I said finally. "Grateful?" Harlan looked genuinely confused. For the push to rediscover who I am when I'm not trying to be half of a couple. For the opportunity to build something entirely my own. For the reminder that change, even painful change, can lead to better things. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I know. You meant to make yourself happy. Those aren't always the same thing." We sat in silence for a moment, 3 people navigating the aftermath of choices that had changed all our lives. Finally, Delphina spoke. "What happens now?" "Now you enjoy your home and I enjoy my independence. You write rent checks, and I provide property management services. You build your new life together, and I build my new life alone. It's not complicated unless we make it complicated." "Can you really separate your personal feelings from the business relationship?" Harlan asked. "I've been doing it successfully for 2 months. I see no reason to change that now." They looked at each other again, probably weighing the practical advantages of staying against the emotional complexity of paying rent to the woman they had wronged. The practical one, as I'd suspected it would. The duplex was perfect for their needs. The rent was fair, and finding comparable space in the historic district would be difficult. "We'd like to stay," Delphina said finally. "If you're comfortable with that." "I'm comfortable with it." We shook hands like business partners, which is what we were now. Not ex-spouses, not romantic rivals, not wounded parties, and guilty participants in a domestic drama. Just landlord and tenants, with clearly defined roles and mutual benefits. After they went inside, I sat in the garden for a few minutes, thinking about how much had changed since that morning in March, when Harlan told me he was leaving. I'd lost a marriage but gained a business. I'd lost a life partner but discovered personal autonomy. I'd lost the security of the familiar but found the excitement of possibilities I hadn't known I wanted. Not a bad trade, all things considered. My phone rang as I was walking to my car. Langston checking on my evening plans. "Are you free for dinner?" he asked. "I know a place with excellent wine and no complicated personal history." "That sounds perfect," I said. "I'll meet you there in an hour." As I drove away from the duplex, I glimpsed Harlan and Delphina through their front window. They were talking intensely, probably processing the conversation we'd just had, processing the reality that their landlord was the woman whose life they'd helped to shatter, and that she was handling it with more grace than they'd expected or perhaps deserved. I hoped they would be happy in the home I'd created for them, not because they deserved happiness at my expense, but because unhappy tenants were bad for business. And business, I was discovering, was very good indeed. The future stretched ahead of me, full of projects to renovate, spaces to transform, and possibilities I was still learning to imagine. For the first time in decades, I was the author of my own story, rather than a supporting character in someone else's. It was a good feeling. It was worth the price I had paid to achieve it. The duplex on Trad Street stood quiet under the early spring sun, its shutters freshly painted in that particular shade of Charleston green that seemed to shift between sage and forest, depending on the light. The roses in the garden had been pruned with careful attention, their thorny canes now reaching toward warmth, buds swelling with the promise of blooms that would cascade over the wrought iron fence by summer's end. Inside, the rooms carried the warmth of lived-in beauty, soft, layered colors that spoke of thoughtful curation rather than hurried decoration, textures that invited touch, and light that moved like memory through the tall windows, painting shifting patterns on walls that had witnessed generations of Charleston stories. Imogen Ashford, no longer Vale, a name she had shed like an ill-fitting dress, walked through the house with a cup of tea in hand, her feet bare against the cool pine floors She had restored herself during those first raw months of independence. Each board had been sanded, stained and sealed with her own hands, a meditation in wood grain and honest work that had helped heal wounds deeper than any divorce decree could address. Her calendar was full now, gratifyingly so. 2 new projects under contract with clients who had sought her out specifically. A talk scheduled with the Historical Society about adaptive preservation in the historic district, and a growing waiting list for tenants who had heard whispered recommendations about that special touch only Ashford and Quinlan brings to their properties. She still received the rent checks from Harlan and Delphina. Though Delphina's accompanying, notes had stopped arriving with their previous regularity. The last one had come at Christmas, a delicate watercolor of the garden rendered in soft blues and greens, the paper expensive, the brushwork surprisingly skilled, with no message tucked. Inside the cream envelope, Imogen had pinned it to her corkboard in the kitchen, not out of sentiment or forgiveness, but because it reminded her of everything she'd survived with her soul intact, a small monument to her own capacity for grace under pressure. Langston stopped. By most mornings now, his timing casual but consistent enough that she had begun setting out 2 mugs when she made her coffee. Sometimes he brought fresh bread from the bakery on King Street, still warm and fragrant with herbs, sometimes just himself, and conversation that meandered through topics both weighty and light. Their connection had deepened in the way of 2 people who had learned to value substance over performance, wordlessly, and without the urgency that had characterized her younger relationships. They were both building new lives with the deliberate care of craftspeople, and there was profound comfort in the unspoken understanding that nothing had to be rushed, that the best foundations took time to cure properly. On Sundays, Beck came, over for brunch, a tradition that had evolved organically from his first tentative visit months ago. They would sit in the garden among the climbing jasmine and Confederate jasmine, talking about his students and their dreams, the small rebellions and large hopes of adolescence, the delicate politics of growing up in a city where history pressed close and expectations ran deep. He still teased her about being Charleston's most enigmatic landlord, joking that her tenants probably had no idea they were renting from someone who could rebuild a 1920s bathroom from the studs up, or negotiate a preservation easement with equal skill. But there was unmistakable pride in his voice now, too. Pride in her resilience, her grace under fire, and the way she'd managed to transform betrayal into a foundation for something better, rather than allowing it to become a festering wound. Once in a while, Imogen would see Harlan at a fundraiser for the museum or the children's hospital, or smiling from the society pages of the Post and Courier, still radiating that particular confidence of men who believe they've won simply by avoiding consequences. But she no longer measured the success of her life against the apparent ease of his, no longer felt the old familiar twist in her stomach when his name came up in conversation. Her home was not built of apologies or compromise, not furnished with the careful arrangements of someone walking on emotional eggshells. It was built of heartwood and heritage, intention and rebirth, every corner reflecting choices made for her own satisfaction rather than someone else's approval. She was no longer someone's wife, no longer defined by her relationship to another person's ambitions and desires. She was the architect of her own life, the general contractor of her own happiness, building something that would last because it was constructed on the solid ground of self-knowledge and hard-won wisdom. And she was just getting started. The morning light streaming through her windows illuminated plans spread across the dining room table, sketches for a carriage house renovation, proposals for 3 more properties, and a leather portfolio containing an invitation to speak at a preservation conference in Savannah. The future stretched ahead of her like the city's famous Rainbow Row, painted in colors she would choose herself. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.